I want to start this workshop with an idea. Communication is a means, not an end. In other words, and as you probably already know, there are so many communication channels that are out there, or ways of communicating, whether it be in person or it's over social media or through advertising or a website. But I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that you should always communicate to reach a goal. We don't communicate for the sake of communicating. And I tell you that because you can spend a lot of your time writing Facebook posts or sending out emails, but if you're not tying that to a goal to raise awareness or raise funds, then you can write hundreds of Facebook posts or send an email to thousands of people, and it really wouldn't matter. So as it relates to communication that matters, I want to spend some time simplifying the process of communication and helping you to categorize your communication efforts and then to write a good message. And what I like about this simple approach is that some of the most complicated communication can be made so much easier just by understanding those two things. Marketing plans get caught up in buzzwords and rhetoric, and I think that sometimes makes it seem more confusing than it really is, because at the end of the day, all you really need to know is how to simply categorize your efforts and write a good message. Let's start with some really quick vocabulary. What is a channel? Well, a channel is any means to communicate. And if someone says, "How are you getting your messaging out?" or "How do you do your marketing?" That's my favorite question. How do you do your marketing? Usually people stumble through a list of things. And the problem with that is this should be a really quick and easy answer. And if you know how to categorize your work, if you know how to put your channels, your ways of communicating into these categories, it's easier to both understand and explain your process. And most importantly, it helps you to think about where you should be communicating and how you should be communicating your message. So the standard way of looking at these is done through a model, if you will. And the first part of that is usually the category of paid channels of communication. Now, paid simply means advertising. It's anywhere you have to pay to place your message. And, common examples of this include billboards, commercials, newspaper and magazine ads, social media ads, and so forth. Now, most nonprofits don't do a lot of traditional advertising. And the reason is simple. It's expensive. It's actually very expensive. So for that reason, I want to skip this particular category and focus on some of the other categories that will probably benefit you more directly in the work that you do every day. So that brings us to the owned category. Now, these channels include everything you control to get your message out. Now, a little confusing, but that doesn't include social media, and you'll see why later. But this primarily, when somebody says owned or they think about their owned channels, it's the website. That's one of the biggest and most important features of any brand and of any communication effort. It's the website, right? It acts as a storefront and a place where people can find you on the web. But it can also include other things like emails. Right? So I have a VCU email address. Now it belongs to the VCU brand. It actually comes out of their website, and emails that I send are paid for by VCU by hosting that domain. So emails fall under own. Newsletters, right? Sending out either a digital or a print newsletter is an owned form of communication. Why? Well, you typically write the stories that go in those newsletters, or you have the list of people who receive those newsletters, or you control how they're printed, if they're printed versus digital, or maybe they're digital in both. You create them, you send them out. That also means that things like posters, flyers, those kind of materials typically fall under the owned category. Marketing kits that are put together that come out of a nonprofit are usually part of an owned category. They control every part of that message. Blogs are the same way. Text messages that you might be sending out through your mobile device or an app that your brand uses fall under the owned category. Again, you control the message and who receives it. Chatting on instant message, for example, is typically a form of owned communication. So when you think about owned, if you control the message and you control the means of sort of getting that message out, it belongs to you. You take ownership of it. So when you're looking at your owned channels, the thing I want to ask you to think about is, when's the last time you updated your website? If it's one of the more important communication channels, when's the last time it was updated, and what did you update when you updated it last? Or when's the last time you sent out a newsletter or an email blast, or heck, even wrote a traditional letter that went through the U.S. Postal Service, right? Because it's owned, there's almost a greater sense of responsibility to manage those regularly and consistently. So our next category of channels fall under the bucket of shared. Now, this just means social media primarily. It gets its own category. It's that important. But before you think that shared just means Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, I really want you to think about what people do on those platforms, right? They like your message. They retweet your message. They share your post. Because of that, one tweet or a Facebook post shows up in front of not only your followers, but their followers as well. That act of sharing puts that message in front of people, that continues to kind of amplify. And it's like saying that they endorse your message when they like it or share it. And it's the first step in creating a viral reach, like what we saw with the Ice Bucket Challenge. So in a shared communication audit, when you think about your shared communication category, think about what platforms you're on that allow people to share your message. Social media is kind of easy. The checklist is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, maybe TikTok, YouTube. But more importantly, ask yourself, do you favor one of these shared platforms over another? In other words, do you do most of your communicating on Facebook? If so, why is that? So when you're thinking about shared, not only what platforms are you on, but why are you on those particular platforms? Now, those first two that we just talked about, not the paid, but the owned and the shared, those are probably the most important when it comes to people seeking services and being able to find you in nonprofit communication. And actually, Pew Research Center put out some interesting data that suggests there's this disproportionate need of having content freely available for people to find it, on the internet. There's actually an article that was posted called The Information Triage that focused on just people who use social media and the internet to search for, advice on healthcare or support, for their health. And what's interesting about that, and I believe this research came out around the same time as the Affordable Care Act, because they were looking to connect healthcare seekers with the website that they put up. But they found that 72% of Americans at that time stated that their healthcare journey actually started online. And what was interesting about this, what they also found out that a lot of people didn't realize, is that for the uninsured, right, and that was the group they were looking for, folks who were seeking healthcare insurance, you might think that they're going to be the largest group of individuals who are going to be using the internet to try and find affordable health care or, start their healthcare journey. But actually what they found is that of the group of uninsured individuals, that's people who are looking for healthcare services who do not have insurance, 21% of them didn't have the internet. Now, you might be able to think of a correlation there as to why someone who's uninsured also doesn't have access to the internet. But the point is, if you think that you can reach everyone through a website or over Facebook or social media, you're actually missing out on almost a quarter of the people who might need your services the most, which is why the next two channels that we're going to talk about are particularly important, and why I think that you should consider a balanced approach to your communication plans. So on that note, this next one isn't necessarily digital, nor is it necessarily print. It can be both. But we're going to talk about earned media. Now, when we talk about earned media, we're talking about when a news media amplifies your message. So when a journalist tells your story, or a news reporter features you on, a daytime segment. So When a journalist tells your story, it's going to be for a number of reasons, but likely it's about an event that you're hosting, or they're reaching out for a local solution to someone suffering from a mental illness. But the other side of it is you can reach out to a journalist to get earned media. It's proactively asking for media coverage. And I find that like advertising, many nonprofits just don't take full advantage of all of the possibilities that exist. Now, under paid media or advertising, it's because they usually don't have the financial resources to get a Super Bowl commercial. We'd all love a Super Bowl commercial, but they're very expensive. But the cool thing about earned media is that it usually doesn't cost you anything more than time. And it really doesn't have to be that time consuming when you kind of know what to do with it. And two of the biggest factors to be successful at getting a journalist to tell your story are visibility and credibility. So you should have a website that's easy to find and an active social media account that is linked to it. And you should also make yourself known to local media by building a list of newspapers, TV stations, radio stations that are in your market. But I encourage you to actually go a little bit beyond that and start thinking about collecting contact information for those journalists in your area to be able to reach out to promote your services or event before they happen. Before the journalist comes looking for you. And you can't always get a journalist to tell your story or write your story. But being visible to earned media outlets is the first most important step, probably. They have to know how to reach out to you. They have to know you exist. They have to know how to reach out to you. And it takes time to build a robust media relations, campaign, but it can be done. And it has great importance in reaching out to individuals who maybe do not have access to the internet. Maybe they don't have a Facebook or an Instagram account, but maybe while they're on the job site at work, they play a local radio station that has a news break in it where they can hear updates about your organization. Or maybe they do have access to some television channels that are provided locally where they can watch a news segment that talks about your organization and the services that you provide. So this last one's a little bit tricky, but it's definitely an important one. It's the sponsored category of communication. And what sponsored means is that another organization, usually another nonprofit or more likely a for-profit, is freely passing along your messaging. Right? So like the local church group puts up an announcement in the congregation's newsletter about a NAMI event that's coming up. Or another example could be a local business decides that they want to help and get involved with your local chapter by collaborating with you during Mental Illness Awareness Week or for a walk. Or maybe they adopt your local chapter for their corporate fundraiser. And in so doing, they pass along all of your messaging to their employees. Now, either way, an organization is giving you support and amplifying your message, and this is a huge resource and benefit. And there are actually a lot of organizations, for-profit organizations, that have what they call corporate social responsibility built into their mission. And by that, I mean they're actively looking for you so that they can partner. So that's another way of thinking about getting your messaging out, or building these collaborations or sponsorships with other organizations in your market. Now, understanding these categories and how to sort of simplify and put things into these categories, think back to the stuff that you or your team have been doing most when it comes to outreach and communication. Is it more on the shared side when you add everything together, or is it a combination of shared and owned? Or maybe you look at this and say, yeah, we're doing everything. Social media is really easy because you can do it from a phone. But, what about all of the other stuff that's in there? Are there opportunities for you to maybe lean on some more owned media to mix things up a bit, or maybe to start a blog? Is it possible to send out a couple of emails or, a newsletter every few weeks if you're not already doing that, which a lot of you probably are? But the goal isn't to give you more to do. It's to make sure you're approaching this in a balanced way. I mean, who knows? Maybe you're missing an entire group of people who aren't on Facebook anymore, people under 25. Or maybe you've exhausted your email list and you're no longer receiving any benefit from sending out that newsletter. Maybe it's time to start looking at developing some corporate sponsors or some nonprofit sponsors in the area to help amplify your message and reach a whole new group of individuals. So that brings us to the second half of this workshop, where we're going to simply focus on how to write a good message. So I'll start with a question. What do you think a message is? I mean, when you hear that, a message, right? It's communication. It's definitely got some sort of a point to it. But having all the channels in the world, as we talked about earlier in those categories, if you don't have a good message, think back to our 3 slides from that previous video that we did. You need to have a good mission, you need to have a good message, and you need to have good amplification. So the message, and often you hear marketers say, the message is talking about what you're selling. Well, remember that you're not selling a tangible thing. In fact, you're not really selling anything at all. Your services are intangible. And because of that, you're not selling, you're telling. You're telling stories, right? And stories are at the heart of every message that you should be creating. And in nonprofits, especially ones that have a humanitarian, pro-social focus, people should be at the heart of every story that you tell. These are people overcoming challenges, obstacles, rising up, making positive changes. What you want to seek to do in telling a good message is to tell relatable stories that inspire people to take some kind of an action. Let's just quickly take a look at a storytelling example. And this is a great organization to kind of refer back to for how to get that telling part as the focus of your messaging. It's the American Red Cross, their blood donation services, and I have to admit I'm a bit biased here because I came out of this industry. But just like fighting stigmas associated with, mental health, blood centers have to combat the fear of people who are afraid of giving blood. But they do so consistently. They do a really good job at their messaging because it tells a story that's easy to understand and relate back to a concept of why someone should donate blood. And the answer for the American Red Cross's blood donation service is that patients need blood to survive, and blood can only come from another person. And they bake that into just about all of their messaging, and they're really good at telling stories.
It's been fun and therapeutic to record what I go through on a day-to-day basis. As a patient with sickle cell, I receive blood donations every 6 weeks. Going to get the new blood, and I'm excited. Are you excited, Mommy?
I am, because you'll be feeling better.
This weekend, I'm just, enjoying life.
So in that example, you saw a person with sickle cell anemia who films her own treatments to raise awareness about that ongoing need that she has for blood. And that story is one of many that the Red Cross embraces in its marketing efforts. But you probably also noticed that it wasn't very long. And it's important you understand that longer doesn't necessarily mean better when it comes to creating a good message. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. Especially in like short form places on social media or text messaging, where you're limited in the number of characters that you can write. Heck, even emails have a higher probability of getting a response when they're less than 125 words in length. Actually, after about 125 words, people start to lose attention. They stop reading, and they're less likely to respond. So keep it meaningful, but keep it simple and direct. So let's do a really quick exercise. I want you to write a short message, maybe, 3 or 4 sentences that you could put up on Facebook promoting signups for Family Support Group. So go find a pen, pencil, piece of paper, whatever you need to do this. Pause the video and then come back to it when you're done. All right, let's set that to the side for now, and we're going to come back to it in a few minutes. But mechanically, I want to break out the components of every message that you write into a few main parts. 2 of them, really: awareness and action. Okay, those are the two main parts of any message that you should write. And then we're going to break those two parts down even further and create a checklist that you can use to evaluate every single message that you write to make sure that it's good. Looking at awareness, it's broken down into three parts: who, what, and why. Who simply names the person, place, or thing that we're promoting. What explains that thing. And then the why gives that thing relevance to the reader, the viewer, the audience member. Now, looking at those parts, the who, the what, and the why, I'm going to do my own exercise here. So I'm going to write a message, an awareness part of a message about family support group. So the first part, who? Well, that's family support group. What? Well, it's a free weekly 90-minute meeting for family and friends of individuals who have mental illness, where participants can speak openly about their challenges. All right, great, but why does that matter? Well, a person with a mental health condition benefits enormously from having social support. Now, looking at that message, the who, the what, and the why, most people would stop and they would say, well, that's it, that's all we need, post it. But we're actually only 50% of the way done with creating a good message, because we still need to give that message action. And when we talk about action, we break that down into two parts: the when and the how. When simply answers, when is the thing happening? Or does it happen regularly? Should they take action today, tomorrow, before the end of the month, the year? Put a time constraint on the message to link it to the last part of the equation, which is how can they take action? So how simply gives your audience a way to take action, like signing up for emails, or following you on Facebook, or calling a support line, or reaching out to a counseling service, contacting someone at the organization. When you combine the when part and the how part, you get the action category, and now people can do something. I'll go back to my original message and I'll give it some action. For the when, every Tuesday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. For the how, learn more or join us by emailing, and then I'll provide an email address, or by calling, and I'll provide a phone number. Let's back up and look at the whole thing. Family Support Group is a free weekly 90-minute meeting for family and friends of individuals who have mental illness, where participants can speak openly about their challenges, because a person with a mental health condition benefits enormously from having social support. Every Tuesday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Learn more or join us by emailing or by calling. So go back and take a look at the message that you wrote and ask yourself, does it contain an awareness component? Does it have an action component? Does it answer the who, the what, the why, the when, and the how? So we've reached the end of our video, and I hope you learned something today about categorizing your channels of communication so that they're kind of easy to understand and explain, and so that you can look at them yourself and say, are we doing too much of one thing and not enough of the other? But also, again, and to the point of our opening slide, good communication is a means, not an end. You need to have a good message that's in there that gets people to take an action, or else you're just talking for the sake of talking. You're communicating for the sake of communicating. So always provide that awareness and that action component to your communication. There's a great resource if you're interested in nonprofit communication statistics that talk about what people are doing well and not doing well in their nonprofits, and that's the Nonprofit Marketing Guide. It's a nonprofitmarketingguide.com, and there's a resources tab there where you can download the annual reports, where they go in and they do communication audits and point out gaps and areas that need to be improved. But they also offer webinars, I think either once a week or maybe once a month, that you can sign up for. Some of them have a cost to them. It's minimal, I believe, but others that they put out, they'll do smaller ones that are free. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested in the conversation from today.